From the halls of Versailles to the barricades of the Fronde, Part 3 revealed a century already burning with change. Part 4, the balance of power. The final quarter of the 17th century where diplomacy and war fight for the last word. By 1675, Europe is a powder keg, France expanding, the Dutch defending, the Habsburgs resisting, and the Ottomans pressing ever westward. Chapter 1. The Franco-Dutch War enters its final chapter. 6 years of blood and water now approaching an exhausted conclusion. Across the Low Countries, fortress walls and flooded fields tell the story of a war that has consumed an entire generation. Vauban turns siege warfare into a precise science, his geometric trenches advancing methodically, making every fortress fall a matter of time. The Dutch make an extraordinary choice, flooding their own polders, sacrificing their farmland, turning their homeland into an impassable sea of defense. Across Europe, sealed letters ride hard through the night, a coalition against French ambition quietly taking shape in ink and wax. At Nijmegen in 1678, exhausted nations press their seals into warm wax, and the Franco-Dutch War finally comes to its formal end. France emerges with new prizes, Franche-Comté and the Flemish cities now permanently absorbed into the Bourbon Kingdom. Against every expectation, the Dutch Republic survives intact, its independence defended by water, will, and extraordinary sacrifice. France's reunions policy turns the courtroom into a weapon, old treaties twisted to justify the seizure of new lands. In 1681, French troops marched through the gates of Strasbourg, a city conquered not by cannon, but by legal sleight of hand. Protest letters arrive from across Europe and are quietly ignored. French arrogance has never been more openly displayed. Chapter 2. The Ottoman Tide. From the eastern horizon, the greatest army in the world begins to move. From a hilltop above the Hungarian plains, thousands of Ottoman campfires stretch to the edge of the night sky. The Ottoman supply train stretches to the horizon. Wagons, artillery, cavalry, and dust in a column that seems to have no end. Vienna prepares with desperate urgency. Every wall reinforced, every cannon positioned, every prayer spoken before the storm arrives. In July 1683, Ottoman forces complete their encirclement, and the greatest city of Christian Europe finds itself entirely alone. Beneath Vienna's walls, Ottoman miners dig in silence, tunneling patiently toward the foundations of the city's last defense. Sections of the ancient walls begin to crack and crumble, gaps opening where the enemy will soon pour through. From the besieged city, signal rockets tear through the night sky, Vienna's final desperate call for salvation sent into the darkness. On the hills above Vienna, Polish and German and Austrian banners gather at dawn, Christian Europe uniting for one decisive moment. On the 12th of September 1683, the largest cavalry charge in history sweeps down from the hills, and the Ottoman siege shatters. The Polish winged hussars descend like a storm, their wings singing through the air as 20,000 horses thunder toward the enemy camp. The Ottoman army breaks and flees in total panic, tents abandoned, treasure left behind, the grand siege dissolving into chaos. The captured Ottoman camp reveals staggering wealth, silk tents, gold, and supplies enough to feed an army for months. From Vienna to Rome to London, church bells ring without stopping, all of Christian Europe celebrating the miracle of Vienna's salvation. The map of Europe begins to shift, Christian forces now advancing east, pressing a retreating Ottoman army back across the Danube. At Mohacs in 1687, Habsburg forces reclaim Hungary, reversing 150 years of Ottoman dominion in a single campaign. Belgrade falls to Habsburg forces in 1688, the Ottoman frontier in the Balkans collapsing faster than anyone had imagined possible. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 makes it official. The Ottoman Empire formally surrenders Hungary, Transylvania, and vast territories across southeastern Europe. Chapter 3. The Glorious Revolution. England stands at a crossroads between Catholic monarchy and Protestant constitutional government. On the English throne, a Catholic rosary sits beside a Protestant Bible, two objects that cannot peacefully coexist in one kingdom. The Declaration of Indulgence grants Catholics the right to worship openly, and Protestant England reacts with barely contained fury. 7 bishops stand trial for defying the king, and when the verdict comes, the crowd outside erupts in celebration. A Catholic heir is born, and suddenly the prospect of a permanent Catholic dynasty in Protestant England becomes terrifyingly real. In secret, 7 English lords compose a treasonous letter inviting a foreign prince to invade and save their Protestant nation. In the ports of the Netherlands, 500 ships are loaded and readied, the largest invasion fleet assembled since the Spanish Armada. A Protestant wind fills the Dutch sails across the English Channel. To many, it seemed as though God himself had chosen a side. In November 1688, Dutch troops step ashore at Torbay, a foreign army on English soil for the first time in generations. One by one, English regiments lower their banners and raise them again in new allegiance, the royal army dissolving without a battle. The throne sits cold and empty, the crown abandoned, the palace silent, the king already slipping away into the night. The Great Seal of England is hurled into the Thames, a desperate act to destroy the legal foundations of government itself. The English Bill of Rights is set down in careful ink, defining for the first time what a king may and may never do. The crown and the parliamentary mace are placed side by side as equals, a constitutional monarchy born from revolution without a massacre. The Toleration Act of 1689 grants Protestant dissenters the freedom to worship, a quiet but revolutionary step toward religious liberty. The Whigs and the Tories take shape as opposing political forces, and the foundations of modern parliamentary democracy are laid. John Locke publishes his 2 treatises of government, giving the revolution a philosophical soul and the future a democratic blueprint. Chapter 4: The 9 Years' War. All of Europe turns its weapons against the ambitions of the French king. Treaty by treaty, seal by seal, the Grand Alliance takes form. England, the Dutch Republic, the Habsburgs, and Spain united against France. The 9 Years' War spreads across every corner of the known world: the Netherlands, the Rhine, Italy, Spain, and the colonies all ablaze. At the River Boyne in 1690, 2 armies clash for the soul of Ireland, and the outcome will echo for centuries. At Beachy Head in 1690, the French fleet defeats the combined English and Dutch navies, briefly ruling the waters of the English Channel. At La Hogue in 1692, the French fleet burns, and France's dream of naval supremacy is extinguished with it. Across Flanders, the war becomes a grinding succession of fortress sieges, mud and mathematics replacing glory and cavalry. The French treasury empties, the debt mounts, and the bills go unpaid, the cost of glory falling hardest on those who never shared in it. In 1693 and 1694, famine spreads across France while the king wages war abroad. His people starve at home. The Treaty of Ryswick in 1697 ends the 9 Years' War. France returns most of its conquests, and a decade of destruction yields almost nothing. Chapter 5: The Revocation and its Consequences. France turns its cruelty against its own most productive citizens. The Edict of Nantes is torn and burned, and with it, a century of hard-won religious tolerance in France is destroyed overnight. Protestant temples are demolished across France, the systematic erasure of an entire faith from the kingdom of the most Christian king. Soldiers are quartered in Protestant homes by law, a campaign of domestic terror designed to force conversion through humiliation and fear. 200,000 Huguenots take to the roads of France, carrying their skills, their faith, and their futures out of the kingdom forever. In London, Amsterdam, and Berlin, the Huguenot refugees arrive, and the nations that welcome them inherit the talent that France has thrown away. In workshops across Protestant Europe, Huguenot craftsmen rebuild their lives, bringing French luxury industries to the rivals of the French king. French manufacturing declines as rival workshops flourish, the Revocation a self-inflicted wound from which French industry will take generations to recover. In the mountains of the south, Protestant Camisards light signal fires and take up arms, France's persecution sparking a guerrilla war within its own borders. Chapter 6: Russia Awakening. From the frozen east, a giant stirs, and Europe will never be the same. Moscow in winter, the Kremlin buried in snow. A vast and ancient kingdom still locked behind its medieval walls, untouched by Western time. The Streltsy musketeers revolt against modernizing authority, the old guard of Russia fighting desperately to preserve the world they have always known. Crates of Western books, navigation charts, and military manuals arrive at Russian ports, knowledge crossing a frontier that had long been closed. The Grand Embassy traces a great arc across Europe, from Moscow to Amsterdam to London to Vienna, learning at every stop. The scissors close on a Russian beard, and in that small symbolic act, an entire civilization is ordered to face a new direction. On the banks of the Don River, European-style warships take shape, Russia building its first real fleet, plank by plank, from borrowed knowledge. Chapter 7. The Spanish Succession Crisis. The greatest empire on earth has no more heir, and all of Europe circles like vultures. The Spanish Empire still spans the globe, but the gold has faded, and behind the grandeur, the foundations are crumbling fast. Empty corridors, dusty throne rooms, and the sound of distant coughing. The Spanish court in its final years of hollow magnificence. The Habsburg and Bourbon family trees are spread across the table, two dynasties tracing their bloodlines, each claiming the right to inherit everything. France presents its legal case with quiet confidence, wedding contracts and royal bloodlines pointing unmistakably toward a Bourbon heir for Spain. Vienna responds with its own documents, its own genealogies, its own insistence the Habsburg claim is equally valid and equally determined. Across every capital in Europe, diplomats negotiate through the night, searching desperately for a solution that will not end in war. The Spanish king sets his seal on his last will and testament, and in doing so, lights the fuse on the greatest war Europe has yet seen. Chapter 8. The Age of Science. While kings wage war, the greatest minds in history quietly rewrite the laws of the universe. In 1687, the Principia Mathematica comes off the press, and for the first time in human history, the motion of the heavens is reduced to equations. The planets move in perfect mathematical arcs, gravity binding the cosmos into a single, elegant, knowable system. The reflecting telescope opens a deeper window onto the universe, light gathered and focused to reveal what no human eye had ever seen before. Beneath the microscope, a drop of water becomes a world, teeming with invisible life that has always been there, unseen and unsuspected. In London and Leipzig, simultaneously, two geniuses invent calculus and immediately begin arguing about who deserves the credit. Leibniz builds a machine that calculates, gears turning in sequence, numbers produced mechanically, the first ghost of the computer taking shape. The Royal Observatory rises at Greenwich in 1675, science placed in permanent service of navigation, empire, and the mapping of the heavens. Halley studies the orbital mathematics and makes his prediction. The comet will return, he says, and names the date with calm certainty. In precision workshops across Europe, new instruments are crafted, each one extending the reach of human senses deeper into nature's secrets. Chapter 9. Global Empires. Beyond Europe's wars, the rest of the world is being remade by conquest, commerce, and catastrophe. Under the Qing dynasty, China recovers its prosperity. Agriculture, commerce, and stability returning to a civilization that had endured decades of turmoil. The Mughal Empire bleeds itself dry in the Deccan. Endless campaigns consuming treasure and manpower in a quagmire with no visible end. Across the mountain fortresses of western India, the Maratha Confederacy expands, a new Hindu power rising to challenge Mughal dominance from within. At Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta, the English East India Company builds its first foothold, small trading posts that carry within them the seeds of an empire. The Atlantic slave trade reaches its horrifying peak, millions of human beings reduced to cargo, their suffering the economic foundation of the Western world. Caribbean sugar plantations generate vast fortunes, and every pound of sugar shipped to Europe is sweetened with the suffering of enslaved people. The colonial frontier pushes steadily westward across North America, and with every mile gained by European settlers, indigenous peoples lose everything. In Salem in 1692, accusation becomes execution, mass hysteria and religious fear combining to produce one of colonial America's darkest episodes. Japan maintains its deliberate isolation behind closed borders, only a single Dutch trading post at Dejima permitted to bridge east and west. Chapter 10. Culture and Society. Amid the wars and revolutions, an extraordinary cultural flowering transforms European life. Baroque churches reach toward heaven with soaring vaults and shafts of dramatic light, architecture designed not to shelter the body, but to overwhelm the soul. Violins, harpsichords, and pipe organs fill the concert halls of Europe. Baroque music reaching a complexity and emotional power never heard before. On canvas after canvas, light falls from unexpected angles, the Baroque masters using shadow and illumination to make paint feel like truth. In the coffee houses of London and Amsterdam, newspapers are read and ideas argued, a new public sphere of debate and intellectual life taking shape. The printing presses run day and night, producing newspapers and periodicals, information reaching wider audiences than any previous moment in history. From the severe Spanish fashions of 1675 to the elegant French styles of 1700, even the clothes people wear tell the story of a changing world. Chapter 11. The Century Assessment. 100 years of transformation now laid out for examination and judgment. The map of Europe in 1600 placed beside the map of 1700, the boundaries shifted, the powers risen and fallen, the world fundamentally changed. The religious map of Europe shifts from battlefield to uneasy coexistence, a century of wars of religion slowly, painfully yielding to tolerance. From Galileo's telescope to Newton's Principia, the century builds a ladder of discovery, each rung lifting humanity further from darkness into understanding. From Hobbes to Locke, political philosophy travels an enormous distance in one century, moving from the justification of absolute power toward the language of natural rights. The pike gives way to the bayonet, the mercenary army to the professional soldier. Warfare transformed beyond recognition across a single century of conflict. By 1700, the colonial map of the world is already European in its outlines. Vast territories claimed, indigenous peoples displaced, the global order rewritten. In Asia, the Ming yields to the Qing and the Mughal reaches its peak, then begins its long decline. The Eastern world transformed as profoundly as the Western. Chapter 12. Looking ahead. The 17th century ends and the 18th waits with revolutions, enlightenment, and wars that dwarf everything before. The clock ticks toward midnight, and the Spanish succession crisis counts down. Everyone in Europe knows that war is coming, and no more one can stop it. Versailles has never been more magnificent, but the treasury is empty, the people exhausted, and France stands at the very edge of its greatness. England emerges from the century with a constitution, a growing empire, and the most powerful navy in the world. Its greatest age is just beginning. Western technology arrives at Russian ports, military reforms take shape, and a giant begins to move. The transformation of Russia is now unstoppable. The Ottoman map of Europe shrinks with every passing year, the tide that once reached the walls of Vienna now retreating toward the Bosphorus. In libraries and laboratories across Europe, the light grows steadily brighter, the age of enlightenment standing on the threshold, ready to begin. Ships cross every ocean carrying goods and ideas and people, the world's economies beginning to knit together into something resembling a single global system. The population maps of 1600 and 1700 tell a story of recovery and devastation. Some regions rebuilt, others still carrying the wounds of 30 years of war. From the English Civil War to the Battle of Vienna, from the Glorious Revolution to the Ottoman retreat, the 17th century contained more history than any before it. The Bank of England, the Royal Society, constitutional governments, and scientific institutions, the century's true legacy is the framework of the modern world. The balance of power, that delicate equilibrium of competing nations, becomes the founding principle of European diplomacy for the next 200 years. From the flames of religious war to the quiet passage of toleration acts, the century traces a slow and painful arc toward a more humane world. The scientific method is now permanently established, a way of knowing the world through evidence and experiment that no future century will ever abandon. Absolutism stands at its glittering peak in Versailles, but the cracks are already there, and the revolution that will shatter it is already being imagined. A single candle burns in a scholar's study, surrounded by maps, books, instruments, and plans. All the contradictions of a magnificent and terrible century gathered in one room. From the 30 Years' War to the 9 Years' War, from Newton's apple to Locke's treatises, 4 episodes, 1 century, one complete story of humanity in transformation. The clock strikes midnight, the candles go out one by one, and the 17th century, with all its glory and horror, passes into history. Part 4 complete, the series complete. The 17th century, the age of kings and revolutions, fully and finally documented. Thank you for watching the complete series. The 18th century, age of enlightenment, revolution, and empire is coming soon.